As y'all come in, I'd appreciate it if y'all hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Of course, tell someone, share this message. Everything that we talk about here on this channel is to be progressive for society and the community. It's just what it is. For each individual that hears it, I typically introduce myself as Boy Jew the Charm Guy, king of uncomfortable conversations and controversial statements. Or sometimes I swap it around, whatever the case may be. But I don't mean that in the sense that I'm having conversations or making statements to be a shock jock. That's not what I do. I know that telling the truth and having a real critical analysis of what's happening in our society can often make people feel a certain type of way. So I tried to get into this yesterday, but my live was acting all funny and wild and crazy for whatever reason. Sometimes that happens here on YouTube. So I just, I didn't get back into the message, but I have some lessons I'd like to get into, and I don't think I really can get into them until I have a very good conversation about what's going on in our country right now. I can't get into these lessons on relationships in the black community. I can't get into some of the racial dynamics that are there between anyone in our community or other communities until we just back it up a little bit and put some things in historical context. It's just what it is. So y'all hit that like button for me as y'all come in. YouTube isn't going to recommend this conversation unless you do that. And this is a conversation I feel like we should have. So y'all go ahead and get them likes up while I prepare to get into this immigration situation. I'm gonna get into the immigration situation tonight. I'm going to talk about systemic racism and what is systemic racism actually. I'm going to talk about oppressive white supremacy. What is that exactly? What are you seeing today? Can you still consider it that? I have to give a full breakdown of what we're seeing. And this conversation is for everyone. It does not matter what color you are. It does not matter what ethnicity. You can be white, black, purple, green, whatever the case may be. This message is going to be for you. So while we await this, y'all get the likes up. Go ahead, hit the likes. I promise you, I'm gonna serve it up. I'm gonna give you something you never thought about. Many of you may have thought about this. Maybe I'm confirming something, but we gotta get in U.S. history. We have to get into our history to understand what's going on. So we're gonna talk about it. What's happening? What's happening right now in our country? Are we experiencing racism? I want us to really dive into this. Are we experiencing racism? Specifically, are we experiencing white racism, white supremacy? Is that what we're seeing? Because I think if we pay attention, we're watching something from a different view. We are seeing something from a different lens. Systemic racism. Are we experiencing that? Are we looking at systemic racism right now? Are we looking at a group of people be subjugated? Or is that what we're seeing? Are we actually witnessing racism, prejudice against Latinos? Are we witnessing this? We're gonna talk about this tonight. We're gonna get into it. Are black people somehow a bargaining chip in this? Should black people be a part of whatever movement? You have a large amount of black people right now saying they're sitting this out. They're not going to participate in this, which I actually agree with that. But we'll get into why I think that. So we finna cook up tonight. I ain't get to, again, I'm leading into a lesson. This is the cooking show. I don't say things to make you, ooh, I'm not finna do all kind of crazy stuff to entertain you. The information is what's entertainment. The philosophy is what's entertaining. The point of view should be entertaining to you. I'm going to slow cook it. I'm going to take my time. But if you stay with me, you will understand what I'm talking about. And I really wish, again, I could have got into this last night. That was the plan, to get into the message and get out of the message so I can get into what I think I may start tomorrow. I still may have to postpone it. It all depends on what's happening in Los Angeles. But I'm planning to talk about the Bill Cosby show, the Cosby show, and why I feel like it was the best family model for the black family. I'm going to get into that, Dr. Bill Cosby. I'm going to get into the positives of Dr. Bill Cosby. I'm not going to talk about the negatives, but I can't get into the message yet. And the reason why I can't get into the message is because in order to understand why I have to have the message, in order to understand why I have to present that message, then you must understand the root cause of the issue. So when I'm talking about black families needing better models, then what would be the root cause for this even coming up and being the issue? What has gone on in the black community over time or throughout history that makes me say that this group needs a model? They need a model to show them how to have a family, or give them a positive reflection on what a family looks like. The reason why that is due to oppression. It's due to oppressive mechanisms that's been used in the past. It is due to what we would call racism. First off, we need to understand what racism has been in this country, but what racism is overall. Because a lot of times we are naming people in an erroneous way. We're giving them a label that they don't deserve. So what we have to understand about racism is when one race thinks that they're superior to another quote unquote race, and that's at its base. Typically, what will happen if that group is in power, they will oppress. They will oppress another group. They will try to remove whatever ethnic group that is out of society, or maybe oppress them in such a way to where they are always maintaining some superiority. But racism is typically looked at as that. Okay. I do believe that anyone can be racist. Anyone truly can under that definition. Anyone could be racist, but typically within the last few hundred years, it has been people from European nations that have practiced this. And what they have done is they have placed the idea of whiteness at the top. So they have kind of taken it a step further. It's not necessarily the English are the best race, or the Australians is the best race. Anything that is close to whiteness or would be considered whiteness or white, a group of white people that can actually encompass quite a few different groups. That the perception has been within the last few hundred years that anything closer to what would be considered fair skin, light skin, really white, or white itself, has been deemed to be better than those of melanated people. So when you have an ideology like that, that isn't really specific to an ethnic group, okay, I'm cooking. Y'all got to get this. That is really not specific to an ethnic group. When you use color, this is very dangerous. And that's essentially what happened. We have seen this throughout the world, but let's bring this yes, I've looked into it. I understand it, and I'll touch on that here in a little bit about what Hitler was doing. Again, This is about history. This is about learning. This is not about hate. We don't do hate here. We tell the truth. If you don't like the truth, you can run away, but we'll get into that. Um, we'll actually get into that here in a little bit. But when I'm talking about whiteness versus melanated groups, that becomes an even more important issue as we get into the United States. So as we get into the United States and we have whiteness that comes in. Now we have to and I need to break I want to break this down because without context, cycles keep going. Meaning that if you don't understand something and you're just reading something or you're just trying to do something that you don't understand, you don't grow. You will not go further. And I have to phrase it this way so we can understand what's happening, because many white people feel as though there's something called reverse racism happening. So we gotta, I'm gonna put this in perspective for them and for everyone else, but we gotta go through history. So what happens is the Anglo-Saxon arrives to the United States. Anglo-Saxon, this is a group of people from, essentially England, United Kingdom, that area of Europe. These are your white, blonde hair, blue eyed, maybe they had some other colors and there was some brunettes, I'm sure, but the real whites, that's where they're from. And they came into this country hundreds of years ago, but they were not the first. There were conquistadors here. That Spain had been over here, and Spain has also noted, the people that surveyed the land, that there were another group already here. And of course, the Anglo-Saxon finds this out. Now, let me put a pause right there. Ancient America has thousands of years of history and civilizations and different groups of ethnicity of melanated people, and even your Asians that came across the Bering Strait. That's all I'm going to say about that, because the argument is, well, who was here? I don't want, that's not just, I want us to stay in the last couple hundred years, because we got to get to this thing in LA. We got to get to this thing in LA. We got to get to some politics, but I got to walk us up there. This the cooking show. We don't take our time. You got something to do, you can always come back and watch. We take our time here because these things are going to take time to understand. You're not going to be able to break this down in a clip. You're not going to get this in 30 minutes. This is not my average show. These lives, when I do this, I'm just going. I could be here for hours, but you're going to get a lot out of it. And it's my perspective based off of things that I've actually read and learned. That's the other issue with us as Americans today, and people in the world, period. We want it fast. We want the information fast. There are things that are in books you may not even see on the internet. You need to go get books. You need to seek out information. Okay, so I'm done with that. The Anglo-Saxon comes in. He sees this group of people I'm talking about, these natives, and several things are happening. When he comes in, and let's just say 1619. We're going to use 1619 and walk on from there. He is settling here. Okay? As he settles here, eventually he brings, slaves. Are they indentured servants at first? Yes, but this turns into chattel slavery. Anyways, he brings slaves. This is who's going to help him develop this part of the world. Native Americans are going to be an adversary here, and there will be wars for years to come. But this happens. This forms into 13 colonies. This is still under British rule. Y'all should know this. This is still under British rule. We know what happens there. The colonies, the settlers are saying, hey, we're doing everything over here. We got our own land. This should be our land. Okay. They get their freedom from Britain, okay? Great Britain, England, their freedom is given to them, becomes a country. While the country is forming, it is very important to understand that the Anglo-Saxon was the one developing the country. And I'm choosing that term for a reason. I'm not just saying white. I could just say white people. But if I say white people, none of this comes together and it makes any sense. Because if you want to understand what's going on, you must understand whiteness and blackness. That's it. And this will all come together, I promise. But the Anglo-Saxon, which is a one representative of whiteness, is the one who came here and really carved out and developed this country. Okay? And I'm paraphrasing all of this. Gave us the Constitution, helped, they came together and wrote the Constitution, Bill of Rights. All of these things was established by them. And they looked at the world through their lens. And they wrote things in for themselves through their lens. Now, what's very interesting is this man, over time, has done a really good job of documenting things. He's documented everything. He's a documenter. He documents it. One thing the Anglo-Saxon did was he did a lot of great documentation up to this day. Okay? So, at this time that these men had slaves, that eventually became a debate. That had been written into the Constitution. That was written in the Constitution that these were commodities. Because remember, now something important to note is Great Britain's gonna forbid this. There are places that are outlawing slavery. America doesn't do that. America keeps it and actually does it in such a way that it becomes very rich. Cotton. 1.3 billion pounds of cotton was picked during the time of slaves, when they were picking cotton. This is very important to know that 1.3 billion pounds of cotton was picked, probably more. A lot of money was made off of cotton. This is going to become an issue, though. This is going to become an issue because these slave owners of the South, probably just, anybody of some type of importance, because I don't think every white person was a slave owner, but many were, many may have done business, many were making money, whatever the case may be. These slaves would come into question because now these guys want to count them as representatives so they can have more voting power in Congress. Hey, the North's like, no, that's not fair, because you don't even consider those people. That's property. And so these guys are saying, no, but these are people. However the case may be, there's a lot of denial in the Civil War starting behind slavery. You don't have to agree if it was the centerpiece, but it was definitely the most important piece of the whole equation. Not just because it was black people, but because of the money it made. Because of the money it made and the power it would create and the imbalance it was going to create in the country. Also, there was a belief, because this country essentially had a lot of Judeo-Christians who started it and had Christian beliefs. There were many that said, this is wrong. We shouldn't have slavery at all. So you had people that believed that, slavery should be abolished. While this is happening, there is a difference. You have the Anglo-Saxon or those of European descent. And remember, you're going to have the French here too. You're going to have Spain here because you've had Louisiana. Remember, as time, France occupied a large portion of the country. So there are different ethnicities here. This is all very important. This is all very important as we tell the tale of America and get us to where we are today. Okay? There's a difference between the slave, and there's a difference between this slave and the slave owner in terms of look. Not if they're human or not. They're human. This is wrong. And these guys know it's wrong because it didn't get outlawed. The transatlantic slave trade had to stop. It was illegal. But these African slaves, and I want to say, and or melanated slaves, I'm going to put a pin in that and I'm going to come back. They don't get taught in school because everyone is afraid of the truth. Everyone is afraid of the truth. And as I get through this, I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. And hey, if y'all hadn't liked and subscribed by now, go ahead. This is typically something, this is what I love to do, but this isn't always my typical subject matter here. I talk a lot about relationships, masculinity. Some may consider it a red pill. It's a very necessary conversation to have. I aim a lot of what I say towards the Black community, Black Americans, because we need to have education. Okay, so the African slave is dark in you. And I should say and or melanated people, because there is a question that were all the slaves African? It's a question, because before 1500, there were melanated people within native groups. Again, I don't want to, that's going to be distracting because we got to get up to what's happening in LA. Okay, so your slaves are of African descent. They know this. Whites are from many places in Europe, but they are considered white. This becomes important to differentiate the two. And so now this is when race, or the issue of race, becomes a factor over time, because it has to separate who's who. And why is this important? Well, we're men, they're property. We're Americans, they're not. They do not have the same amenities we have. This is why this becomes a differentiating thing. So you could be white and not be a slave master, slave owner. You could be white and be poor and still be a citizen because you're not an African slave. This is going to get disgusting because it's going to break out into a civil war. We're going to have a civil war behind this. And Emancipation Proclamation, the slaves got to be free. No, you will not be your own country. No, you will not get to do what you want to do. We are this is the United States. We are the country of one power. We have the Constitution. This is how we are going to run our country. And now we have a civil war against the Union and the Confederates. There are 7 states that secede. I live in one of them, Texas. Texas was a part of the 7 states to secede from the Union. Okay, this is very important. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, today, the Civil War in the United States is still, I think, one of the bloodiest, deadliest wars we've ever had in the world. So this was very, very intense. Long story short, we know who won. The Union won. Came, brought the South back in, and freed the slaves. But now we have an issue. Now, get them likes up. Go ahead, get them likes up and subscribe. I'm going to tell you what our issue was once the North wins. Now, I also want to throw this in there. This has not really fully explained racism yet and whiteness, because I need to throw out there that Abraham Lincoln is from Illinois. Abraham Lincoln believed, like many people that were considered white during the time, is that the South should be able to keep their slaves. They actually had some pretty intense slave return laws. A lot of these states that were in the North, they had slave catching laws and rewards and all type of things like that. That's gonna get us into the Dred Scott case, because this is where we're going to have the Supreme Court say that no, he could, no person, this black person can't be a citizen. This person is a slave. And at the time he was a slave, but the argument was, hey, the area that they were at, being kept or living with their master, there was no slavery allowed. There was no slavery there, so they wasn't slaves. So he was fighting to be a citizen. The Supreme Court, I'm paraphrasing this. This off the dome, this off me reading some stuff, maybe a little, you need to go check his accuracy, but this is, there's a lot up here, so forgive me. But for the most part, they say no. But slavery's still going on at this time. Well, what happens when we free the slaves? What happens when we free the slaves? Okay, now we free the slaves. We free the slaves. They're going to go back to their states where they've been. Many of them are going to go off of the plantation, have nowhere to go, and they're going to stay on the plantation and still work for free. There's so many stories, but there is an issue. When we talk about states' rights, states have rights. And the states withheld the right to say that, hey, we're not going to let these guys be citizens. This becomes an issue. I believe it's the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. These are the Reconstruction Amendments, because when the United States went through Reconstruction, they had to reform the country. The South had to come back in order. The states had to get back aligned. Everything had to get back to where it was going to be. Now, there was a promise, an alleged promise, and I'm going to say alleged because we never got it, that freed slaves should get some land and a mule. This was the way to say, we're going to start them off right. We're going to make them citizens and be able to, and put them into society. But it didn't work out that way. Quite a few things would end up happening eventually. But the first thing is citizenship. So we freed them. Now we must make them citizens. That's going to bring us up to the 14th Amendment. Everyone knows, anybody that studied this history, Constitution, would know what this was talking about. But there is nuance. You had slaves who had been of African descent here for a very long time by this time. Over 100 years. You have hundreds of years. Some were actually returned. Some slaves had been sold to other owners and went up north somehow, or some that were up north as indentured service went back. There are some outliers, but for the most part, most of the people that were here and were born here. And they had to figure out slavery, 1865, I believe, but the Emancipation Proclamation was written a little bit before the Civil War goes down, so I believe you can Google it and put it in the chat. I believe it's 1865. What's up, Jasmine? So I'm trying to get us to where we need to be, because we got to talk about these rights. Okay, the 14th Amendment is going to address this issue because they knew that the states would not let these slaves say that they were citizens. So what happens is the 14th Amendment comes into play. But of course, they're not going to word it that way. They did not word it that way. They made it a birthright thing if you were born here, because they wanted it to be really distinctive. They wanted it to talk about that time. There's no way when the 14th Amendment was written that they would have imagined the country of this magnitude and an immigration issue of this magnitude. You have to understand this. So this was generally thought to be or understood to be to those people that were black. This is going to become an issue later on. I don't know if his name, I forgot what his name was, but he was basically a Chinese citizen. He was a citizen of the United States that was, his parents were in China. Uh, they were from China, but they were here for a while for whatever reason. He was born here. Uh, they left, went to China, and then couldn't get back in because China had just drafted some type of law that anybody that was a citizen of China had to be a citizen there. Anyways, the guy that was born here goes to, this was in California, by the way. He takes his case all the way to the Supreme Court, and he uses the 14th Amendment as an argument. It's Chinese. It's not black. Listen, I also want to acknowledge there have been atrocities across the world. There have been issues with all sorts of groups. I'm not here to deny that. I'm here to put where you live, I'm here to put what we're experiencing in its proper perspective. Because when we make arguments too large, people cannot understand. They can barely understand this, but I try to make it enough to where we can keep up. If it's some dates that's off, go get the dates. If it's something that's wrong, go get it. But you need to go look this up for yourself. But for the most part, this is accurate. And when we got, I think this, I want to say Sue Kim or something like that. But this is something that went to the Supreme Court. This is very important because now we begin to talk about prejudice. So I've explained racism, but prejudice. What do I mean by that? Well, we don't want to exclusively say that it's black or that it's enslaved people because we don't really want them here. We've had them for so long. We don't really know where to place them, and then we don't want to say it in this magnitude and just have more. This is just me kind of shooting from the hip on that, but it's pretty, to me, it's heavily insinuated through history that there's been some issue of that time of white perception, those that have considered themselves white and those that have considered themselves black because of this issue. So this is an ingrained thing. We know that these are different people. Also, you got to look at the country at the time. Supreme Court justices were white. Most of the politicians, people in charge, were white. So this is where you have a white supremacy, a white, Now, this does not mean that because there's white supremacy, in actuality, that every white person there is racist. It can't be the case because, remember, there are laws that are going to eventually change to do its best to correct the past. You have to understand that. I think that the Supreme Court got it wrong, but at the time, they got it wrong. And there were thoughts of this at some point. However, maybe they didn't get it wrong in the long run, because now if that Chinese guy has children here, they will be American. You can say Chinese American. You could say that because of ethnically where they're from, but you can call them Chinese American. You have other groups that will come over time, but let's talk about some of the groups that had been here kind of early on. So even if we talk about the natives, the indigenous people, or who's considered the indigenous people, I'm going to throw in another note. Remember, I told you that American history, ancient American history, is thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. So you can have potentially different groups of indigenous people phenotypically. Do you know what I mean by that? Meaning that you may have had something look more Negro 30,000 years ago, something that eventually got more Asian, and even blended. There's a science part to this too when we start talking about blending ethnicities. That's important to know. But by the time we get to this installation of history, there is a more Asian looking red, maybe even phenotypically looking, just high cheekbones, whatever. There's a certain type of native that is here by this time. The natives probably got done the worst because they actually were killed off. Regardless to what story was told, and also the natives were not one monolith either. They have different tribes. Generally, they may have had the same. We see it that way, but they are different. Just like people may look at Americans, say you Americans. When I was in the Navy and I went across the seas, they say you Americans. They not they see a bunch of different colored people. They see a bunch of stuff, but they say you Americans. They not going you black American, you white American. They going you Americans. When we go over there as a bunch. So the Native American was essentially, the reason why I brought that up is because there are tribes. There are tribes of, indigenous people that just wouldn't give up. They're going to fight you. There were some savages. That's just, every community has some savages in it. However the case may have been, they definitely got annihilated, essentially. So what they have been left with is, in many cases, poor conditions. They have been left with a lot of poor conditions. They can have casinos and stuff like that, but I don't really even understand to the magnitude in which they have felt the damage of expansion by another country. A country that's starting off really, really white, really, really racist, but over time is developing because it's running into so many ethnic groups, and then it must shift its law because of it. But it's key that we understand that this starts with slavery. It is very key that we understand that. But it's going to get very nuanced. What's up, Red? I had to take it to this because the other connection we had when we were on streaming through our software, we cut off, but I didn't want to cut off on this one. Okay. This conversation is gonna be nuanced. Okay, it's gonna be nuanced because now we're going to have other ethnic groups get involved. But we must understand, slavery and the 14th Amendment is what's going to even really mold the immigration argument over time. It is because so black people are citizens? Yes. Where are we going to put them? Where are we going to deport them? So one thing that I want to debunk right now is, and the reason why there has been an argument on describing who black people are, the black people you see like LeBron James, the black people you see like Michael Jackson, the black people you see like James Brown, the black people you see like Marvin Gaye, Michael Jordan, all the sports people you like, all these athletes, Beyonce, the American black people, we have to differentiate who that is, because I need to tell you this. Those descendants of African slaves are not illegal immigrants. They are indeed natural birthright citizens, because even before they could become that, the 14th Amendment didn't exist. So those that are black, like myself, who have Louisiana Creole and then have Texas black lineage here in this country, I am not an illegal immigrant. I am a natural birthright citizen. But because of its wording and because of its interpretation over time, you can put all groups of people into it as long as they were born here. And that generally had been the idea. Reason why I brought up Native Americans and other groups that were here. Yes, you're going to have Latino people here, because we must understand that. Okay, we gotta get it, y'all. I love history, and I would ask that everybody go get into some history. But you have Spain that comes, conquistadors. Spain has really come and conquered so much of this part of the world. That's why you have a lot of Spanish in this region the way you do. But there's a native, the Spaniard, and there are melanated groups of people there already. Not all of them came from the transatlantic slave trade. I think that's almost silly to think that. But what the conquistadors did was they did come in and conquer much of this land. Now, in some of these places, as they go in and intermingle, they make different groups of people. We overlook this when we talk about these different civilizations or these different ethnic groups that no longer exist. The culture may not exist, but these people have intermingled. It only makes sense. It only makes sense. They have intermingled and become other ethnic groups. So when you look at someone like the Mexican, that's what you see. You see an indigenous person. You see a Spaniard. You can see some melanated group of people intermingled. They're just going to be in certain parts of the world and be associated as that. But there are melanated groups of people in Mexico. You got to understand that. Okay? So I'm just giving you the whole pie. I'm just setting this all up. Now, as we are expanding, when we are coming into Texas, by the time we come into Texas, and the Anglo-Saxon, remember that word I used? Now, I talked about the Anglo-Saxon coming and getting the 13 colonies together, progressing into slavery, this, this, then, the third. Now, I'm jumping around, but I'm going back actually, before the Civil War, a little bit before the Civil War, when the Anglo-Saxon comes into Texas. Okay? When the Anglo-Saxon comes into Texas, Mexico has it as a territory, I believe. It's a part of Mexico. It is. Mexico has pretty much a lot. It has Texas all over to California. This is very true. But they let the Anglo-Saxon in. They were reluctant at first. Can you guess why? Because they didn't want the slaves here. They did not want to have slaves in Texas. But as they're expanding the South, the Anglo-Saxon comes in and he brings slaves. And guess what? It's plenty of cotton down here in Texas. Comes in, boom. This is where we start to get involved with Mexico, because Texas is going to become a republic, and then it's going to become a part of the Union. But it's going to become a republic first. The Anglo-Saxons are going to come in and fight out Mexico and take it. Now, I believe as far as California goes, and much of that territory, it was purchased. It was purchased by the United States, and then Mexico becomes what it is today. Of course, I'm sure it's only logical to think that many Mexican people, or many people that would be considered Mexican, or whatever that ethnic mixture is, probably stayed, whatever the case may be. Because you have Tejanos, you have people in Texas that are Texans. They've been here. And you know what? They are birthright citizens. So we have to understand that too. That the 14th Amendment is going to capture everything that's inside. And that is a multiracial group. But even though we have a multiracial group, even though we have this multi-ethnic community, society, and country being developed, we are still having what is called white supremacy. White supremacy meaning that all those that are in power at the top are white. But I'm putting this all in historical view. If you're coming in late and you just catch in the middle, you're gonna have to get it from the beginning, because I can't go back. But you do have to stay with me if you want to get the rest of this and put it in context. So white supremacy is really saying that the majority of the power at the top is white. Now, here's where racism enters into the chat. It all depends on, at the top, how these people feel about others, and that's how they'll maneuver. There were certain things they just couldn't do because it wasn't constitutional, but certain things they went ahead and did anyway because they wanted to have those states' rights to do so. That's just what it is. This is when racism becomes a thing. So you can have white supremacy and be split on racism. Not all whites will be racist. But a white person can still believe that there should be a majority of white, stewardship, leadership, whatever the case may be. So in this country, although you have this multi-ethnic environment growing, you still have something at the top that's white supremacy. Let's get into Jim Crow. While all this is happening, these African Americans, these black Americans, these descendants of the slaves are citizens. Now that means that they have entitlement lawfully. There are things that they are entitled to just like their white counterparts. But they don't get it. They don't get it because they're going through segregation. And so what the white power structure did of that day was say, we are going to separate ourselves from you, and we're going to do it legally. Since we legally, we legally can't just go lynch you and do whatever we're going to do. We can separate ourselves. We can take amenities. We can do whatever we want to do. Separate but equal. Separate but equal. That, we have separation, then there's a separate but equal. Okay, we're making sure they are protected under the law, but they can't come here, blase, blase, blah. This was directed blatantly to black people. The colored for colored, blacks. This was for the whites. This was deliberately directed to this group of people. Although under the Constitution, all citizens can vote, black people were usually prohibited from doing such a thing. So I want to show you, although we had a multi-ethnic environment in the United States, black people were still heavily targeted for the racism and white supremacy at a time in this country. When you get into other groups, Mexicans, Italians, any other group that was not of African descent, typically were considered white. They typically were considered white. I think we can take that information and fast forward to today. Immigration is an issue right now because the lines are just not defined enough in history for us to understand why we had certain rules or why we went about things a certain way. People being able to come in illegally and just have anchor babies, as they say, that amendment, that right has been exploited. It's up to Congress. It is up to Congress to come up with the naturalization rules and how it should work. And they could totally do that, but they really hadn't for so many different reasons. I gave you the example in slavery when they tried to inflate their numbers so they can have more representation in Congress. They can still do that even with illegal immigrants. I mean, illegal immigrants to some way are being manipulated much like slaves, but they are not slaves. They are from another country. It must be dealt with. And I think all American citizens should understand that because it's always been a process getting into this country. But here's the part that I really want to separate from all of this because I think it's a misuse of history. I think it's a misuse of a group of people that that did not, ask to come here. They were brought here. They were brought here and forced into a perception of themselves that I wouldn't wish on anybody, but it made us some of the most brilliant people on earth. Do not take the struggle of the African slave and the descendants of the African slaves and compare it to anybody's struggle because it's not the same. And until we make that a different issue, everyone is going to exploit it for gain. Our struggle is not meant to be exploited. It's meant for us to learn from. Hey, we don't want to see other groups and races of people be harmed. We don't want to see, you know, any melanated group of people being, chained up, hurt, harmed. We don't want to see anybody with any hint of color be harmed because we're not the ones that did that here on this soil. We can get into the whole African soil, y'all, blah, blah. Man, let's talk about what went on this soil. We talking about our house in the United States. I wouldn't wish that on nobody. But at the same time, just because you have faced what I explained at the top, how I talked about racism, white supremacy, and yes, just because it was aimed at one group does not mean that it hasn't been aimed at other groups who just were not really white. Yes, that's very true. But when they looked at the spectrum, they really came out on our people, black people. It's just what it is. So I want y'all to understand that we are caught in a political war. We're caught in a political war. I'm going to specifically say this to black people, but I want everybody to be in understanding of this. Black people must be exclusively separated from, listen to what I'm saying, all of political ideology that does not include us specifically because of everything I just said on this live. It is the only group that was positioned in such a way that it faced real oppression. Everyone else that isn't non-white has experienced racism and has experienced some forms of oppression. But many of these groups have either had a place they could go back to, a country they could go back to, or some culture that they could relate to that would help them. We have not had that. We have literally had to create our own culture in the United States. You have witnessed this. If you do this and you separate this group, then you alleviate the excuse that everything's racist or that everything's oppressive. You do that when you say, okay, but it was really intended over here. We have dealt with that and will continue, or have currently dealt with that, or set up ways that that group of people can deal with what we can put on paper and say, hey, we've been oppressed. We can show you these numbers and go from there. What you don't get to do is say that illegal immigration is the same. You don't get to say that any of the alphabets are the same. You do not get to say any other ethnic group is the same. Even those that experienced the atrocities in Germany, that's terrible. I'm never going to say that I don't want to play the quote-unquote trauma Olympics, but just let me help you understand something, that what I'm talking about in terms of slavery happened on this U.S. soil to this group of people for this amount of time, and it was wild. So I'm never going to absolve white participation, just like we don't get to say that the black people, we didn't get to pick on who brought us here and what advantages and privileges we have. We don't get to pick that. We didn't pick that at all. So we must understand our history and know, even though we did not directly participate, we have benefited in some way or not benefited based off of that lineage. Y'all gotta stop playing. But this is not an immigration rate. The racism and oppression that we've experienced in this country, yes, it has its effects here. It has its effects here. I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to realize that a lot of that illegal immigration totally gave cheap labor. I mean, it's very similar to slavery, because slavery was free, but to illegal immigration, it was cheap. I don't think they ever counted on a group of people which was silly of them, that's gonna come from another place who are smart. They're not dumb. Like this idea that everything non-white is dumb, that there is a belief out there of that. Because illegal immigrants came in, formed up, and got some shit. This is gonna matter politically. This means that people who aren't necessarily white can come in and have some power, and they got the numbers. This thing is about numbers. But the issue on that side too is they're just proximity to white issues. So guess what happens? Yes, you're going to see dark melanated illegal immigrants be removed. You're going to see you may see some unfair treatment. You may see things that come off as being racist and prejudiced. And guess what? It may totally be. But people here that dealt with that found a way to legislatively get that done. And it was granted. It was a war that went behind that. And over time, the country and the demographic looks different. It's not just white people feeling that way. It's black people that feel that way. It's Latino people. This is a multi-racial country, very diverse, defining itself in leadership and probably having some struggle, because what you actually think is white supremacy is changing. Although that's changing, we have this systemic racism thing that may not really, because it is based off of the creators of it, and it's instilled pretty deeply inside of us. This is why anybody getting to the proximity of whiteness begins to take on its characteristics. So white people can totally say, well, we're not racist and white supremacy. Look at this. Even though many of them are still in power and they have the money, yes. But that power structure is diversifying. And on top of diversifying itself, not only is that power structure diversifying, the system, however, is still reflective of the power structure that has been there for hundreds of years. It's just what it is. This is very complex. This is all very complex. This material is something that most people have to put together. We have to teach people to think this way. Definitely history, definitely at younger ages, so we know how to move forward and don't have issues like this. Because the United States is a multiracial place now. It's multi-ethnicities here. And during a time like this, we have to define what it means to be American, what's American, and what's good for America. And that's not racial. It's not racism. When you allow a large sector of people to come into the country, you may run into homogenous zones again. And that you're going to run into homogenous zones of people that aren't white that's still being ran off systemic racism. It could change. This is why black people are saying, well, no, we've experienced some racism from Latino people. So we don't want to get involved. We don't want to help you. And guess what you going to do? You going to turn around and do to us what they did to us. No. There's a reason this country was created in such a way that it's not easy to change laws. It's not easy to impose. Listen, the white man today, a different group tomorrow. The only way you keep that from happening is keeping diversity. Now the white man is saying, hey, we done made We didn't change. We didn't did this. We didn't made all kind of rules that we didn't want to make. We gave up slavery. We gave up, separate but equal. We did that. And they feel as though they are best suited to continue that power. I truly believe that. And hey, they did do that. They've been a part of the change. The issue is now we've got to make it diverse in a positive way. And we've got to be talking about stuff that can't be exploited. I mean, I don't want to get too political, but how did race and who you like come in the same boat? I mean, now we're going to be having the racist conversation in a very direct way now. And this is all bringing this out because now this is not a white versus black. This is like different groups having say and opinion and perceptions of one another based off an old white history. So this conversation is now very nuanced. This conversation now is very layered now. This is a very layered, nuanced conversation. And so until you say the history right, until you talk about the history correctly, until you admit all the different things that have happened, you're going to have this as a problem and as an excuse. I just think too, to the Democratic Party, shame on you. Shame on you for always, misusing real struggle and exploiting it and passing it around and using it for your own benefit. Because it is never to anyone's benefit to let 11 million people in anywhere. Notice you see Latino. Listen, we've talked about white supremacy. Now let's talk about racism. Let's talk about systemic racism. Let's talk about racism and how it operates and how it works. Racism is very layered and nuanced too. But the assumption from anybody who isn't Latino, believing that Latino people went in the booth, actually went in and voted and didn't know what they were voting for, is the most dismissive, prejudiced, ignorant, racist shit I could think of. Now that's that. And I'm going to tell you why I say that. So you mean that you feel, and black people were a part of this too. We were a part of this saying this old goofy shit because guess what we have issues with? We have a racial identity issue up here too because of the view of blackness and what that's been. So we go, y'all didn't know what y'all were doing. We supposed to be going over here to massa. And you think in your head that Latinos went in and voted for Trump without knowing that mass deportations would happen. You a damn fool. You a damn fool if you believe that. Because guess what? Here's your other poor racist idea, is that not every damn Latino is a fucking illegal immigrant. Y'all acting like Latinos. Remember, I told you about the Tejanos. You got people in once the 14th Amendment is on, and they taking over land and calling it the United States, whoever there and people that's being born there, you finna be a United States citizen. So you have a bunch of Latinos. It's like, I'm from here. I live here. I'm American. You do have some that were naturalized that say, hey, I love America. I'm waving my flag. We understand the process. You don't think that they would actually say, hey, there's too many illegals here. They not doing it right. We finna go in. Why is that hard for y'all to believe? Just like you've had an exodus of black people leave the left and go right, you've had an exodus of Latino leave blue and go right. And I'm talking about they not Uncle Toms. They not know our version of it. Or Sambos. They left. There's something that bothered them. Don't fall for this racist shit, dog. What I mean is, don't fall for there's an actual that we're living in racist times. We're not living in racist times. I just showed you and taught you what racist times were. I just taught you what oppression. And I single-handedly pointed out the only group that's actually ever really realistically experienced that. No one has to that magnitude. And the reason why, if you don't look white and you here taking advantage of something, is because of all those rules that black people got. Because you had to use that. Oh, I'm people of color. Like, what the fuck is people of color? What is that? Oh, I'm a minority. What? No, what is that? Because there are instances when you've taken advantage of being something else, and we can't do that. So let me get this back to now. Evidently, even with the history, Latinos, blacks, Asians, other people that are not white, that are doing something for themselves, feel as though, hey, I can take this dude. I don't care if he racist. I don't think that his racism bothers me. I don't think it's gonna affect me. And when it do, we'll trip about that. We'll vote him out. We understand the process. I don't even think we're thinking about what are we going out to fight for. If a Latino citizen or a foundational black American, you know what I'm saying? Uh uh it gets caught up in some ICE raid and get detained, it's gonna be hell to pay for that. That's the least thing that Donald Trump would want to happen right now. So that's just not gonna happen. Where are the Asians at? They not saying shit. They don't want to say shit. They're like, y'all gotta understand that some people came up in homes where their families really had to go through a process to get like citizenship. They ain't trying to fuck that up. Plus, throwing rocks at, we've learned, throwing rocks at, hey, this where you think you at? Throwing rocks at FBI car, federal agent cars, and you see what's good, bro. They got a profile of that dude. That dude had bro had a mask on, couldn't see him, threw the rock at that Jeep, and the FBI got a wanted picture out on bro. We cannot take a situation that is not real or historical events and attach it to something that's totally different. Illegal immigration isn't the same as the racism that all of us that are non-white have experienced here in this country. It's not because the issue's different. This is about immigration. Who can come in here and stay? No, you can't do that. Now, to say you can't go use that restroom because you little and you Mexican, or you big and black, is racist. You can't do that. The citizens, or anybody, because of those laws, you can go into a restaurant and eat and not get a billy club on upside your head. There are arguments in terms of federal aid that should go to low income neighborhood. Listen, we have issues to fight. I'm not saying that. I'm not one of them. I'm not one of them guys that's gonna go, oh, we don't have any kind of issues going on. No, that's not true. We have issues going on. But we're talking about immigration, meaning that who can come here and just stay, and that no. And so why would the left allow that many people to come in? Because they want that vote. They want that vote. They want to be able to have control. In their minds, if they let enough people in and be able to shift the votes, then guess what? They'll be okay politically. I mean, that's like selling your country out. No, this is not me saying, hey, the conservatives are Jesus. I'm not saying that. There are issues over there. A lot. But there are issues that are not foreign to black people. We kind of used to that. We know what they're up to. We know what they have the capabilities of. we don't understand trans issues. We don't understand some of these super liberal left ideology concepts they have. We don't, because we just don't know how that's going to affect society overall. And for crying out loud, they let 11 million people in. They ain't spoke. Now, I'm finna say this, and this might make somebody mad. Black people, they really trying to replace you. The Democrats, they trying to replace you. You said Donald Trump was gonna put you on the plantation. Okay, he trying to put you on the plantation. The Democrat trying to replace you. For all y'all out there, oh, I want to get out here and march too. The Democrat is trying to replace you. And they trying to they took your whole movement and made it into 100 others and don't address you at all. So I really don't see how y'all still voting blue. I just don't get it. No, I'm not a MAGA person. That's the other part. You can have voted for Trump. You can have conservative views and not be a MAGA person. You just got to be able to look at it for what it is. This is, man, listen. Governor Newsom, what the fuck is a sanctuary city? What is that? What is a sanctuary city? Why do you have them? What is that? Now you had these cities that did that complain. Because what's racist and what's not racist? What's racist and what not racist? What's racist and what's not racist? We have allowed a part of history to be exploited, to be misused to a lot of different people. And it's not how it's supposed to go. So now you have somebody, and then you really make, so you talk about like this black fatigue, or you talk about Latino fatigue, like you have to talk about these different fatigues. The reason why people are saying that is because there's been a misuse of accusation. It's like, oh, this is racist, this is racist, this is sexist. People are overloaded knowing that no, all that shit is not that. Even black people know this. Bro, I grew up in the hood. I grew up in South Park. I'm from Houston, Texas. I grew up in South Park. Literally, I'm gonna say the only time I saw somebody white was at school, a few teachers, and whatever, maybe a cop, some cops. I ain't hang out with somebody white till I went to the Navy. I'm black. Like, black. My experience has been black. Went to a black high school. My ex-wife went to a black HBCU. Might be the hood Huxtables. Just being like, it's been pretty average to middle class. And I'm saying, and I've experienced racism. I've experienced oppression, blah, 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 blah. Had to make a way about that shit. Had to find a way to take care of myself. It happened. I don't think all this shit is racist. Like when Jasmine Crockett get up there, we're living in the civil rights era. Like, you sure about that? You sure we living in the civil rights era? Because I don't feel that way. And I'm in the place where fucking slaves was freed last. I live in Texas, dog. Juneteenth. That's why we celebrate it. They done took Juneteenth and just, black folk done made that the national barbecue day. Everybody black just doing it, don't even know where the fuck it come from. So everything is not racist, and it's just hard to get people to logically think. Now, I'm gonna say this on the flip, because I've done this whole thing. This is not to make white people feel comfortable at all. you're part of the history. You was doing some fucked up shit. So yeah, everybody's gonna think you're racist right now. Get over it. You know, coming up with these ways to try to back people up. No, we're not. You know, reverse race. You can come up with any fucking term you want to. Reverse racism, whatever. You cannot erase what you were part of for the last couple hundred years. No, I don't think you're terrible. No, I don't automatically think you're racism. Okay, you didn't own slaves. Blah 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 blah. I don't get to get away from what I was attached to by being a black American, and you're just not gonna get away from your history. You can't. But what you can do is speak out about it and say, hey, that's fucked up. I get that. This is where we at right now. This is how we can work together right now. This is what we're going to ensure happens as a country, because this is a multi-ethnic motherfucking country. And you got to stop thinking that your race is going to die out. Because we're Americans now, buddy. When we go overseas and we have an enemy, we going to be that. Hey, I've served with racist white people. Listen, I've served with racists. I've served with gays. I'm black. The military is very diverse when it comes down to it. So there's no reason to hate each other. I definitely believe in boundaries, but at the end of the day, you have to own that shit, bro. A lot of y'all don't be wanting to own that shit, and y'all make the conversation stretch on further than they gotta fucking stretch. Then y'all come and try to reverse the history. We're not gonna call it slaves. We'll call it indentured servants. Why does that bother you calling them slaves? That's what they were. We already know the history, bro. Y'all have a tendency to do shit like that, or y'all try to reword something or remove something. Like, that's why everybody's looking at you like that. No, you can't do what you were doing in the past. Doesn't change the fact that it happened. It's just what it is. It's what it is. It doesn't change the fact that shit happened. No, it's not your fault right now. Y'all be crying a lot, dog. But hey, we looking at the same history that y'all looking at. Yeah, I've been cooking. This a cook up. My channel has been about a lot. I love politics. I love history. But my primary subject matter is relationships, the relationship dynamic between men and women. It can be used across the board for everybody, but I am directly speaking to black people, mainly black men. And the reason is because of everything that I described right now. One of the things that came out of our oppressive experiences is the emasculation of the black man. Many men in my community have learned masculinity through trial and error, and really from dealing with women. It's just what it is, and it's not always the healthy route to having a family. Many of our men have disproportionately been locked up in prison. This is a fact. Many of our men have just been prone to so many ills of life, and it's taking them out of here. So now that we have grown as a society, now that we know better, we can do better, I can come here and I can talk to my guys. You know what I'm saying? I can encourage them. Sometimes I'm up here and I'm going through things, but I'm still encouraging you, because you have to stay encouraged. That's primarily where my material is, and a lot of that is because of what we've been through. That's why I make it specific to our people. I can come on here and say whatever now. I can have a wide range of conversation. I just did it tonight, because I think with everything that we have going on as black people, we cannot afford to get into any conflict, and we can't afford to go through anybody's march, because we've already done that. We are in another phase of our experience, and it is now to empower the intellectual side. And we have done this at times, but we're in one again that it will be massive because we're not living in the times that we have previously. So it's all love. We ain't tripping on y'all. We ain't throwing no hate y'all way. But right now, we gotta go in the house and everybody gotta sit down and have a talk. We got stuff to work on before we come deal with anybody's stuff.